Thank you so much for coming to this event, which is part of Edmonton Design Week. So you want to become or be an architect. We're happy to be here, and we're hoping to just have a pretty open presentation and open conversation. So even though we're kind of seated at desks here, it seems a little formal. Our hope is that it's really informal and there's lots of back and forth. So please don't hesitate at any time to raise your hand or ask a question. And we'll also have lots of time for other questions at the end. We've got about an hour and a half, and as you may find, or you may know now, architects often like to talk, so we will try our best to keep ourselves honest and to the time and get through all of our material. We have a fourth colleague that will be joining us. She has a young baby that's only 5-6 weeks old, so we give her a lot of latitude, so she may come in a few minutes as well.
The baby might be here too.
Maybe the baby will be here. We'll see about that. Okay, well, let's get going.
So we're just gonna do a quick land acknowledgement, and we're happy you all made it out today here on Treaty 6 territory, home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. It's nice that we have the opportunity as architects to kind of shape this space, and we're trying to do better as we work collaboratively with people who have lived here before and called this place home much longer than us. And also we as a generation right now and newcomers as well. So thanks for coming here, and we hope we can inspire you to help us on this collaborative design journey and do so responsibly and respectfully.
So our presentation today is going to focus on I guess we call it the art and the science involved in architecture. And that's sort of one of the most interesting things about the field, is that it's something that uses so much of your brain and your spirit. And at its best, it's a real balance of a lot of the different disciplines that you might have studied in the past or are studying right now. So we'll be kind of looking into that. A lot of the presentation will be, varied information. You'll see some of it's didactic, which is to say these are the courses that you need to take to get into this program. But others are, a bit more broad. And again, please don't hesitate to ask questions. And how do you get them? So, let's start, Stephen.
Sure. So I'm Stephen Faust, I'm an architect and an associate with Group 2. Our office is actually across the street right here, so I can look down and see the library and watch all the things that are happening here, which is pretty neat. This should say Group 2.
Oh gosh.
But that's okay. As to another firm, there's a bunch of firms in Edmonton, and they tend to be combinations of letters and numbers.
Right.
So
yeah.
It's a little bit hard to keep track.
This is basically by the way of introducing someone as like who works for PepsiCo. No, actually works for Coke. So it's yeah. So pardon me. That's.
But yeah, so I've been practicing for about 10 years now. I studied engineering before I started in architecture, and yeah, we'll have a chance to give some more details later. So maybe I'll pass it over to Joy.
Cool. I'm Joy. Nice to meet you all. I have been working at AVID Architecture for the past 2.5 years. I'm an intern still, and I have a certified passive house designer title, which kind of focuses on making more energy robust and holistic buildings. So yeah, that's where I am right now. Pretty new in my career. Just graduated spring 2021. So thanks.
And Olivia will maybe come in here. You'll see her. She is a principal at NOR Architects, which is a very well-established Canadian firm. I used to work in Toronto. I was very familiar with NOR there as well.
Principal, it's kind of a weird architecture thing, but a principal isn't like a principal in high school or elementary school. Principal is like a partner, usually a part owner of some kind. So sometimes you'll hear that term thrown around, and so that's Olivia.
Thank you. Good point. So I'm Ian Mulder. I'm an architect. I actually work for the city of Edmonton. So the city actually has a small group of architects that operate with other professionals there, including a number of different engineering groups. And we support the development, the design, and construction of city buildings. And Milner Library here is one of them. But our buildings also include, you know, rec centers and police stations and fire halls and all kinds of structures. And I also am the public art coordinator at the city. So I help coordinate the Percent for Art program with the Edmonton Arts Council. That's a program where a small percentage of every city project, eligible project, contributes 1% to a budget to hire artists who might produce sculpture or any other large, typically large form public art. You may have seen some of those here. There's actually a new one that's just across in Churchill Square or at some of the fire halls or rec centers where you see that public art up front. Anyway, that's us.
So kind of talking about what is architecture?
Oh, yeah, so slide, right? Yeah, that's this one. So let's go back one slide maybe. So we wanted to start with a fun one. So what is architecture? So Ian kind of introduced it earlier as both the science and the art of design. Now we want to touch on that. We're also going to touch on some of the more everyday what architects actually do. But we want to start with this image. Does anybody know what building this is or where it is? Barcelona.
Nice.
Yes, this is the Sagrada Familia designed by Antoni Gaudi in the late 19th century, late 1800s.
Yeah, something like that.
Started then and went.
Started then. Yeah. So Gaudi was a sort of pioneer architect, artist. While it's an old building and it's very ornate, some people consider him to be one of the very first like modern architects because of his methods for determining structure. And maybe we go to the next image. So this is kind of it from the outside, and this is a view from the inside. So it's a church. It's they didn't accept any public dollars from the government of Spain, so it took a really long time to build. They've been working on it for over 100 years, and they're only just starting to complete it now. So when this was started, it would have been built by hand. All these stones were cut by hand and assembled into this extravagant structure. Now, in the last 5 or 10 years, they've made a push to try and finish it. And of course, it's 2020, 2018, 2020 at this point. So there have been a lot of advances in digital fabrication. So while this was designed to be built using these handcrafted techniques, it's been finished using all sorts of robots and computerized design and very complex sort of structural analysis. So it's really an interesting hybrid between this old way of making things and a much more contemporary way. And they've actually been able to finish, or close to being finished, the building in its original form using these modern techniques. So this, for example, is one of the very ancient techniques. This is it's called the catenary model. So what Gaudi figured out, and his this is sort of the engineering brain. This is basically the model of the cathedral upside down. So each one of these, it's built to scale, and each one of these bags represents a little bit of weight. So he discovered that if you hang this mesh upside down and you attach weights that are scaled to the building weights, you can turn the building up, you can turn this model upside down, and the shape that's described by the arches will be a structurally appropriate shape to support the building. So as long as you hang the right number of bags from the right point, you get all of these sort of dramatic, complex three-dimensional shapes. You can go in, and this is how this was engineered and designed. You can go in and measure exactly the shape of the curve, scale it up 1,000 times, turn it over, and start building it. And as long as you build it according to that shape, the whole thing works. So of course, this is long before computers and computational design could be used, but they had figured out a way to make it happen. Is there anything else to add there?
No.
We could talk a lot about catenary forms. One of the interesting, it's an arch. What's very interesting about that, most arches express load down and out, which is why if you look at old churches, there are things called buttresses, which kind of hold the arch together. But a catenary form actually resolves all the forces on it straight down into the ground. So you don't need additional buttresses to keep it from spreading. Anyway, we don't need to talk more about that, but
there's an interesting firm and like research studio in Ontario, like the Philip Beasley group in the like living architecture, and they're doing some similar and interesting types of studies, but yeah.
Yeah. So this is both kind of straddles the art and the science is where we were going with it. So you can sort of see some of these early hand sketches. You can see some of the more detailed, this one in the middle here might be more of a technical type of drawing. This is a plan with some elevations, and this is a photograph.
Sort of early rendering, maybe?
Or maybe a drawing. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways of making buildings, and this is just a great example of one.
Mhm. And just
And here you
another
can see, so
view.
this is some of the gray concrete. This is a more modern addition to it. You can see all sorts of these different kinds of geometries. There's scaffolding there that's still working. So it doesn't have exactly the same feel as it would have when it was built in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But it's incredible that they've actually gotten it built sort of following the same schemes.
And it's kind of a nice contrast from the outside to in, showing more of the handmade qualities versus what the robot can achieve with these precision lines.
Peter, have you been here?
I have. Soon.
It's on the list for sure.
So now, which of these buildings do you think were designed by an architect?
Probably a lot of them.
Or what, sorry? Bridge. Any other thoughts?
All of them a couple times.
Yeah, that's a pretty good guess.
These ones.
These ones for sure. Do you think that's it? A lot of you were actually right.
That's right. So I mean, this we wanted to say that while we have these spectacular cathedrals, that's not just what architects do. They do all sorts of buildings, including the entire skyline that we see in Edmonton from these buildings built in the last 100 years or 150 years. They've all had architects working on them.
So do all buildings need architects? We would say as architects, yeah, you can always have an architect involved, but by law, by building code, which is sort of the law that architects follow, housing type, which we call Part 9, because it's a Part 9 of the building code, don't necessarily need a profession. Now, often they do, and often there are engineers involved as well, depending on how you build it. But one of the interesting features of the Canadian building code is that residential houses don't necessarily need a licensed professional, which actually opens up opportunities to all people to, frankly, build their own house, apply for permits, and so forth.
Some say that's kind of started after the war because they were trying to house people faster and such. So that's why you also see a lot of those similar types of bungalows in some of our older neighborhoods and such.
So what do architects do? Part 1. I'm gonna stand up a little bit so I can see this flag. Okay, so architects plan, they design, and they give shape to our spatial landscape. So this is buildings, interiors, neighborhoods. We could also add things like furniture, public art, all sorts of design and planning and really shaping the things that make up our built world. We collaborate with clients to conceive of a project's vision and goals. So this is before we started to draw anything, we need to listen to the owner and the client to figure out what they want and how we can interpret their needs to deliver that. We engage with the public to ensure that buildings are both safe and meaningful to the community. So I actually just got off the plane today. I was in the Okanagan, where I had a bunch of public meetings. And so I'm meeting with members of the public. I'm standing in front of the screen, hearing what people have to say. It's a rec center that we're building there. So they're coming to me and saying, it needs to be fun, but it needs to be deep enough and it needs to be cold so the swimmers don't get too hot. And it needs to be fun for the kids, and there needs to be a water slide, there needs to be a wave pool, and things are coming at you from all angles. And it's our job to kind of take the owner's needs, take the public needs, and kind of bring that all together in a way that is safe, is meaningful, and it does what we want it to do. And then finally, we work with contractors and engineers to find creative solutions and solve problems. So it's never just one architect making the building. It takes enormous teams of people. So it's like the biggest group project you've ever been a part of, because you've got dozens of engineers, you've got a bunch of other architects on your team, you have people at the city you're working with, you've got hundreds of builders who are going to be on the site, who are using the drawings that you've made to help build the thing. And so there's a lot of there's a leadership role, but there's also a lot of listening and working through problems with the trades and with the contractors. So what do we really do? So that's, you know, kind of broad, the first image, first slide. What do we really do on a day-to-day? So there's sketching, there's technical drawing, which is mostly done on the computer these days. There's 3D modeling, think like Minecraft or any other SketchUp or anything like that. We're building physical models, although we do that less frequently now. More 3D printing. There's also laser cutting, there's CNC routing to make different models. There's renderings. There's video editing and fly-throughs, presentations, public consultation, writing, spreadsheets. There is math, for sure. And there's actually a lot of writing in terms of making proposals and communicating your ideas. There's building code knowledge, graphic design, branding. Next slide. Tours and site visits. I spend a lot of time on site, meeting with people, solving issues, talking to them, go to conferences, you do project management, you do office management and human resources. So you've got a team within the office that you have to manage. There's contract administration, which is really when you're on site. There are specifications, usually written. There's business development, there's specialty consulting. Joy mentioned Path of House, so that's focused more on sustainability. There's community master planning, historical restoration, development and finance. There's really an enormous world that we can be a part of. I mentioned that I'm practicing at a firm here in Edmonton. Joy is also practicing at a firm. Ian has practiced at a firm, but is currently working for the city. So in a slightly different version of the job. Olivia, who's not here, I mentioned she's an owner. So some of their work that they do is more focused on some of the development and finance world. So actually working with the banks to get money for clients to build things and dealing with the sort of flow of finance, because buildings are crazy expensive. So all to say that there's a super broad sort of skill set and a super broad sort of application for your skills.
I'll add, you know, like just to put a finer point to it, if you like doing lots of things and you're kind of interested in science, but you're also interested in art, you're interested in writing, architecture is a great field because you don't really have to pick. You kind of are needing to be, you know, knowledgeable a little bit in all these different fields. And also, depending on where you land and different phases of your career, you may end up doing a lot of these, or you may become more of a specialist. So it's a really big field, and it really is up to you how and where you end up. And that's, and I know that when I was a student, it was very unclear to me what exactly architects do and how does it fit into the studies that I had been pursuing. And so that's one of the reasons we're doing this here, to try to you know, shine some light on that.
Yeah, I would also add that it changes over your career. So just when you start to think you're getting good at one of these things, you move a little further in your career and you start doing a whole different aspect of it. So it's never boring, that's for sure.
Is Group 2 kind of a medium-sized firm?
Yeah, we're about, there's about 80 of us. Do you have a question? Yeah, what would you say are the main things that should happen? Okay, we're gonna get to that a little bit later. I'm just gonna, I appreciate the question, but we're just gonna hold that one.
I was just gonna say, depending on if you work for a smaller, medium, or large size firm, it kind of affects what you're exposed to and what kind of jobs you do. So sometimes at a smaller firm or even a medium size, you get an opportunity to kind of work through more of this stuff. Whereas at some of the larger firms, you can often find yourself doing a bit of the same work and getting really specialized in one area. And so just remember that even if you find yourself maybe specializing in something that eventually you don't start to find much of an affinity with or want to do something else, you can consider changing the size of firm you're at too. Like at mine, I get a lot of opportunity to do project management as well as design, which is kind of nice, but it's because we have less people. So then you're able to put your hand in a lot of things. And so, yeah.
So we're gonna just go through one project here that I worked on personally, just to sort of give you a real sense of things that I have done over the past 5 years. So does anybody know this building? It's in Edmonton. It's on 124th Street. This was from the 1930s, so probably never saw this. And this one's from 1988, so most of you probably never saw this either. And this one's from the 2010s. This is all the same building. This is the Roxy Theater on 124th Street. And I wanted to show these images because the first, when we started working on this job, the first thing we heard was that it was this important institution on 124th Street. It had a long history. It was a movie theater in the 1930s, and that's what it was built for. It had this kind of white stucco, kind of international style aesthetic. And by the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s, it had this yellow paint on it and this very retro sign. And then later it got kind of teal and yellow, and the sign got a little more weather worn. But we heard from both the theater company and from members of the public that it had such a strong connection to the community and had this really strong history. So we knew we wanted to capture something from the history of the building, and architecture tries to do a lot of things. Sometimes it does them successfully, sometimes it does them less successfully. But in my work, I often try to find one or two things that we can really try to make potent in the project so that it really resonates. So this one we had sort of decided that the history of the site was important to us. It burned down in a fire, so it was gone. We were building in the same spot. Go to the next slide. Okay, so what does that look like? That starts very preliminary, determining the functional relationship. So this is a section. This is like cutting the building directly in half along its length. Like you made a sandwich, you cut it in half, you can see all the lettuce and the tomatoes and the cheese is what we're looking at here. So here, this is a really rough hand sketch. We're saying, this is the street over here. We're saying, okay, we want to get, the owner told us they wanted 3 performance spaces. A big theater here, a black box theater here, and then a rehearsal space here. So this was the concept, to try and squeeze these 3 things onto the site. When we started working, we had a specialty acoustics consultant who was working with us, and they brought forward that when you overlap these spaces like this, it's very hard to isolate the sound from transferring between them. So we decided that it needed to be more sectioned to have better sound isolation between the different performance spaces, so they could run things. If anyone's been to Next Fest, for example, they run all 3 at the same time. So we had to separate them a little bit. And then we had to get all this other stuff. We had to get washrooms and a rooftop patio and a meeting room and the control booth and some lobbies. And so this was really, this didn't happen in one day. This happened over several weeks or maybe a couple months, where we started to develop some of these a little bit more detailed. And then we get to here, which is, we're getting into a little bit more of a technical drawing here, where we can still see the big theater. Now we can see the seats. We've started to put people in there so we can look at the sight lines so that everybody has a good view. We've got space for the washrooms. There's a black box theater space here, and we've started to put heights to things and really put space to it. There's sort of a catwalk shown above here. Starting to get into just some of the nuts and bolts of how this thing all has to come together. And then we would sort of get to this massing conceptual model. So this is done digitally, obviously. And this is just really trying to look at some of the broad strokes. So we knew we needed an elevator because we wanted it to be accessible. So we knew there was going to be a tall bit. And we also talked about wanting to make, if you think about a theater on Broadway, it has this marquee, it's full of lights and it kind of projects over the street. And so we had this idea that we wanted to try and make this overhang over top of the street, to make a bit of a sheltered space and to make it feel like you're really coming into something. And you can see this one, this is the photo. So you can see, you know, this is where we started, and then this is sort of where we ended up with it being constructed. So, you know, it's not all there. We hadn't figured out the sign yet. We hadn't figured out, you know, exactly how tall things had to be, but you know, we just knew there was going to be a window and there was going to be some kind of overhang, and that was kind of all we knew. So you can see how this is probably 4 or 5 years after this was made. And this is one of many images, but it just sort of gives you a sense of where things go as they start to become real. So this series here, this is just looking at the sign. So we heard that the sign was super important. People love this bright yellow sign. Kind of had this retro feel that we liked, and we thought that was kind of important to the story. So this was me doing sketches, and you know, a lot of people ask, like, do you have to be good at drawing to become an architect? The answer is no. First I made this on the computer, and then I took trace and I traced it. Full disclosure. I still don't know how to draw 2-point perspectives. I just make them on the computer and then I trace them. But tracing is actually an easy way, you know, if you're just modeling it, you have constraints and it takes a long time. There is something about using the pencil and the paper that kind of frees you up to move a little bit quicker and a little bit more creatively. So these were just thinking about how we were going to get we knew there was gonna be a window here, and you know, how is it sort of an Art Deco thing? Like this is very kind of like 1930s Art Deco. Just really trying different things, and then sort of settled in on some. We were getting closer and tried modeling a few, and then how do the letters work? Are they on the side or are they on the top? Is it like the spine of a book? Does that work? And then eventually we sort of got to here, and we liked that it was a wedge, and that you could see it from the corner and from both sides of the street, and that it was just sort of working for us. And then this is actually a rendering here. So this is when we're getting a little bit closer to defined. And what actually happened here was building code wouldn't allow us to build it this tall. So everything actually got a little bit shorter. The R moved down where the O is, and all these things just kind of shifted a little bit. But generally, this is pretty close to where we ended up. The next step would be sort of more complex technical drawings. So this is just describing how we wanted it to work. We wanted a window in the back so that so as you were coming up the stairs, you could see into the back of the sign. But we realized that, you know, this was kind of problematic. It was hard to clean the windows. So we ended up actually just kind of faking a window here and anyways, if you go up there, you'll see what I'm talking about. This is a technical drawing. This would have been something we worked on before the project was constructed. So here we're saying all the measurements. We're saying what kind of letters, what kind of material, some details on how the lights were going to work. This is a photo from a mock-up they built in the signage shop. So this would have been, you know, say this was in January. This might have been in July. This might have been 2 years later, where we're in the shop, we're picking the exact kind of the right yellow film, so we get the color exactly right. The font is exactly right. This was a pretty cool moment because you can see it sort of starting to come together. Like you're making these drawings, and then all of a sudden you're here in the shop seeing it happen. Then these are just a couple shots from social media. When the crane came to lift this sign, it was a big deal because people were very attached to the sign, and just seeing the uptake from the Edmonton Journal, from CBC, seeing all the stuff on Instagram, it really validated that like we had made the right choice in doing this kind of retro yellow sign. Like it's not modern by any means, but it was meaningful to people. So we were really happy with how that sort of played out.
Just add something here. This is a really good example of something that Stephen raised earlier, which is the team component of architecture. While Stephen and his team in the architect's office might have been doing initial sketching and working out some of the relationships, there's a lot of other folks here involved, right? You know, they're there's a sign shop. There would be an electrical engineer who would be responsible for providing the electrical power for the sign. There would be a structural engineer who would be involved in ensuring that that sign is going to be supported appropriately within the building. There's issues of building code. So maybe there's a building code specialist. There may have been conversations with the city. In Stephen's office, there might have been someone who actually was writing some of the advertising or social media posts. So in this one really small element of the building, you start to get a sense, this is like a huge effort by a lot of people. And not only that, it's also a part of the building that is just one little part. And yet it's got color, it's got materials, different textures and different feelings from the material that have both like technical and aesthetic components. There's typography. So there's all these things that go into it. And this kind of speaks to our point about a big discipline. So if you like putting together all sorts of little pieces and being, both big picture and very micro, then this is something to consider.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
We have one more here. This is a rendering from inside the space. So, this sort of shows the wood wall, and this sort of shows our glossy design, but what's missing from this is people. That's one thing that when you get into the rendering, it can be challenging to get people looking just right. But I went onto their Facebook page and found these photos from when they're really using the space. And like, this is a method or a technique to get to here. And so this is really the important thing, is the people who use it and will continue to use it for the next 50 years or 100 years or beyond. So all this work kind of goes into making this, but it's really, this is what we're going for at the end of the day.
Architecture is made by people and it's for people, right? I think that's the real thing. And I think what drives us too, when we're doing all this work, which is a lot of work, years and years of work, is that at the end of the day, people are going to be there in the theater, enjoying themselves. Performers are going to be able to express their craft, and everyone's going to be able to do that in not only an aesthetic environment, but a safe environment. And actually, the safety part is something we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's one of the key roles actually of architects is life safety.
Since you two are both registered, did you have to take that oath? I'm sure some people don't know, but you're supposed to take some type of oath that says you're going to protect the people before you actually get your final stamp. So that's just an aside.
Oh, interesting. I did it on Ontario. I'm not sure if I had to do it.
Right.
But,
did you have to do that?
I read a disclaimer and I checked the checkbox.
Okay, yeah. Something like
I
that.
thought it was more of a gesture.
Yeah.
And I was like, ooh,
I got licensed through the
right. There. Just a quick thing too, some people might not know what a rendering is, but it's just a way you try to visualize some of the designs. So like this might look kind of like a photograph to some of you, but if you look really closely, you can see that this is a really high fidelity rendering. So it's meant to look like it's a photograph, but it's actually not.
You'll see there's no cords plugging anything in. That's kind of a giveaway.
Yeah.
That it's computer generated. And so this is something that this one we didn't do in our office. We had done all the modeling and all the design, but we went to a different firm who specializes in high quality renderings like this. And so that's a role, that was someone who studied architecture and then went on to sort of focus on digital production of images.
And a lot of overlap, of course, now with video game development. We've had a lot of people who train as architects, Stephen alluded to, not only within the architecture field doing renderings, but go off and do game design.
Yeah.
Because if you think about all the various games out there, the architecture, not in the computer science sense of architecture, but the actual buildings and environment, to make it look realistic, it has to be, someone behind all that has to understand what that is, how that works. Now, AI is also part of that increasingly, and we'll see how that goes in the next few years, I'm sure. Okay, so this is again a bit of a more formal slide, but this is kind of the process by which you become an architect. So in Canada, when you call yourself an architect, that's actually a very particular designation. and not all people who are designers can call themselves architects. So an architect is a licensed professional. In Canada, you're licensed provincially. So if you practice in Alberta, you are a licensed architect in Alberta. You can hold multiple licenses. So I used to be licensed in Ontario and in Alberta. But right now I'm not doing any work in Ontario, so it wasn't worth paying those fees. But there's different routes to getting there, and we'll show some of them. So to get to the final, licensed architect, you start with some kind of undergraduate degree. In Canada, you can actually come from different undergrad backgrounds. Some people choose to take an undergraduate degree in architecture. There are a few schools that do offer that. University of Alberta is not one of them, but there are schools like, for example, in Calgary that offer what they call a undergraduate degree in environmental design, which is about architecture, but also about some of the related design fields and incorporates other elements like urban design and landscape as well. The bottom line is some kind of university degree. And then you would study a graduate degree. So that'd be a master's degree. And that's really the base. Hi, good morning or good afternoon.
Hi.
And in Canada, to become licensed, you need to have a master's degree now. There was a time when an undergraduate degree was sufficient to be able to proceed to the internship, but nowadays a graduate degree is necessary. So, and if you look at the timeline, undergrad degree usually takes about 4 years. Graduate degree, depending on the program, and we'll talk about the various programs across the country that are available. We'll show you where they are geographically. It can take between 2 to 3.5 years. And then there's a thing called the internship, which is common in many professions. So, if you're a doctor, you do a residency. If you're an engineer, I think do they call that an internship as well, an engineering? Something like that. But it's common in professions where there's a period of study and then there's a period of work experience. And in architecture, that's a really important part of your education. You get paid, you're working for a firm. That's really important. It's not an unpaid internship, but it's a period of time where you're working usually under a licensed architect. And in some ways, you're a junior. At the beginning, you start doing, lesser tasks, and as you grow, you can quite quickly grow into doing all kinds of work like project management and other things. But you need time to do it, and in Canada, you need to do about 20 hours. So that if there's about 2,000 hours in a work year, if you will, so the minimum time is about 2 years. Sometimes it takes a bit longer. And the important thing in your internship is that you get experience in different sides of the architecture realm. So many of the things that Stephen had mentioned before, contract management, design, different phases of design, working with engineers, working with budgets, those are all subcategories that you need to kind of go through. The time you have to commit to when you're doing your internship. And then ultimately there are exams and licensing. In Canada, there's a exam called the EXAC, which is the exam for architects in Canada. You take that, and then you follow this whole process, and you can then call yourself an architect. So the long and short of it is, it does take a long time to become an architect. However, there are earning opportunities throughout, because even when you're doing your undergraduate degree, you can start working in an architecture firm or perhaps in other realms of design that are associated.
Just emphasize that internship is, as a word, it often gets thrown around as something. They're often unpaid, or they're fully paid, or I don't want to say they're looked down upon a little bit, but it kind of comes, there's some baggage with the word internship, and it's not the best word for this. Use, I would say. All of that stuff I presented on Roxy, I did when I was an intern before I was licensed. So you're still doing meaningful work, you're getting paid like a regular person, but it just kind of comes with that term. So don't let that be a discouragement. I know it looks like a really long time to get there, but you're doing the work and you're being compensated for it. while you're on the way there.
And that term, I think as a profession, we're trying to find another word for it because a lot of folks who are doing their internship, it's not like they're, 19 years old, you're often in your 20s or 30s. I certainly was in my 30s when
Some people come to the profession later too, like have done a different career, but they still will have the same internship title and such. So maybe apprentice.
perhaps. So there are alternative routes as well to becoming an architect in Canada. So this is called what they call the syllabus program, and it's run by an organization called RAIC, which is basically the Royal Architecture Institute of Canada, essentially the federal body of architects. I happen to be the Edmonton chair for RAIC, so I sort of represent some of their interests with the local architecture community here. But they have a program called the syllabus program, and essentially it's a program for folks who may not have done an undergraduate degree, maybe working in different fields. And it recognizes that architecture is a big field and that not all people who are, who might make a great architect come from that, university, master's, background. So a lot of people who are, for example, involved in home building. I know some people who were carpenters and were very good at design because they had been doing it. They've been building for a long time. They went through this program and then eventually became a licensed architect. It does take a lot longer because you are kind of you're doing a kind of an online program as opposed to an in-person program. And because it's a profession and there are responsibilities that are critical in the profession, I talked a bit about life safety and those kind of things. We are responsible for things in the public realm, and so to call yourself an architect, it takes a lot of study, and the organizations that are responsible for upholding those standards take the education component quite seriously. So if you're interested in this, their link is here. You can look it up online too. It takes a fair bit longer, but it is an alternative path and might enable you to continue working in an allied field.
And just quickly, some of you may be wondering, where Nate or Sate in Calgary fit into this. And unfortunately, they don't count as prerequisites to doing the master's. So you would still have to go and do an undergrad somewhere before then doing the master's. I know one person who graduated a year or two before me, who did 2 years at Nate and found a university in Australia that counted it as prerequisite to her getting an undergrad in architecture. And so because she was still able to do the whole schooling in 6 years, despite being abroad for 2, the money kind of balanced out a bit because she saved a lot of time too. So there are still workarounds and such, but this is generally the way. Or if you're staying in Canada, then you still go and do an undergrad and then a master's if you went to Nate first.
Some of the college credits from Nate or say even Graham McEwen, they transfer, certainly some of the design classes and stuff. So, don't be dismayed if you're in another program. Check it out and see what you can get. And it may be better than you think. So talk about the places, or
I didn't know.
Okay, so there's lots of places across the country to study. These are all major universities, and you'll note here they indicate where there's a bachelor degree and where there are master's programs. So bachelor degrees are great degrees. They're a great start to your architectural education. But sometimes they're also an end in themselves. You can take an architectural degree and do lots of other things without necessarily going on to become a licensed architect. Because the skills that you learn in architecture school are really broad, you can apply them to lots of allied fields. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Edmonton doesn't have an in-person architecture program. Athabasca University, which is an online university, is sort of housed in Edmonton, if you will, but that's not part of the mainline master's program. The closest program here is in Calgary. Many students who are from Western Canada might also go to Manitoba or to UBC.
And Calgary doesn't have an undergrad in architecture, but they just started this bachelor's in city building design, they call it. And at that school, they have a landscape architecture, planning, and architecture masters. So that's kind of a feeder into any of those there. Arguably transferable to the other universities, but potentially needing to like make an extra year up or something. Cool.
So we all studied we studied in 3 different universities here. I grew up here and did my undergraduate degree at University of Alberta, but I went into Toronto and did my master's there. You were in Calgary.
Yeah, I did my master's there and I did my undergrad at Carleton.
And you were in Ottawa, Carleton.
As I mentioned at the start, I started in engineering and I did an engineering degree first, 4 years in engineering school in Southern Ontario. And I went into the program at University of Manitoba, which is there they had a sort of pre-master's program where I basically went into 3rd year of the undergrad and did 3rd year and 4th year of the undergrad and then did a 2-year master's as a grad student. So there was availability for a little more funding, which was great. But it was a 4-year master's after a 4-year undergrad. So it took me 8 years.
Yeah, and same thing for me. Like that's actually how we used to know each other. And also just apologies that I came in so late.
Oh,
But
good.
I'll definitely would love to stay behind and answer any of you guys' questions for sure. But yes, so similar thing. I actually had a science degree at the U of A, and I ended up going to U of M, going through the pre-master program for 2 years. So my master's, when I got at the end of the day, was 4 years. So it took me about 8 years to get actually the master's. I did. My major was in chemistry.
Yeah.
So it varies. Like it's not like you have to. I think some of the people that we were with like had a philosophy degree.
I have a philosophy degree.
Oh,
There we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And an art history degray, and some
Yeah.
people had
English, all
English.
sorts.
Yeah, it varied everywhere. So, and I think when as further on down the slides, you'll know that how relevant actually how general architecture could be and how specific it could be. That's sort of where you want to take it.
Would you say that having taken engineering helps you a lot in the architectural field?
I would say it did. Now, I studied biomedical engineering. I kind of wish I would have stayed structural, like a little more applicable. But yes, I took a lot of thermodynamics, and especially when we get into some of today, like we're working in a lot of different sustainability. A lot of sustainability work that we're doing that requires a pretty good understanding of thermodynamics and energy and how electricity can turn into heat and how to use the sun and all that stuff. So I would say a lot of that carried over pretty well, actually. And as I mentioned in the introduction, like it's being an architect is like leading the biggest group project you've ever imagined. And engineering school is really good for working in group setting, giving you some of those skills to work with others and share leadership and to sort of hold each other accountable. So yeah, I got a lot out of my engineering degree. Absolutely.
And I also found that so I studied chemistry, and right now I feel like there is a lot of research and attention to material sciences. So, and that actually becomes that's actually architects are more interested, very involved in that side of things as well too. And since you can't get so far in your design without really considering your material, so it's kind of nice that there was that overlap at the end of the day.
Can I give a good example of that? I'm just looking at this carpet. Right, so this is a carpet that someone picked, believe it or not, but someone picked this carpet.
Yeah.
Right, and that carpet, you could buy a million different carpets, but someone picked this one. Well, why did they pick this one? Well, they picked it because of its pattern, sure, but also because of its material quality. So one of the things that architects are very interested in these days, and the world is interested in, is sustainability. So the architect in specifying this carpet might have asked some questions around, well, how was this carpet made? Or maybe more to chemistry, what chemicals went into the process of making this carpet? Does this carpet smell or off gas for a long period of time? And so there are all kinds of standards that we support in our selection of components of a building that actually lead to in some very different directions. And I would guess, Olivia, that oftentimes your ability to read some of the chemical reports when it comes to different products is really quite valuable.
Yeah, and it's there's definitely overlap. Like I think when it gets to really crazy research or PhD stuff, probably that's a little bit out of my league, but definitely in terms of considering certain certain qualities and sometimes organic or inorganic, like what if metals, for example, like some very general ideas that it's enough to actually form certain decision-making processes during design. Yeah.
It's kind of nice too, because sometimes you come out of high school or your undergrad or wherever you may be, even a career, and you realize you have all these different interests. And it's nice with architecture, you can do chemistry or civil or biomedical engineering. I did history and theory of architecture with a minor in industrial design. And I took a lot of random courses from different faculties at my school, like philosophy. There was a technology, society, and environmental studies faculty too. And you can start to bridge the different gaps and start to make all these connections and learn from these different perspectives, which really help like shape your design sense too later on. And even if you ride one of those degrees out to the end, you can still have a path to get the master's and become a licensed architect as well. So it's nice to be able to test different things.
So we looked at this already, but these are sort of the main, places for master's degrees in the country, most of the major cities, couple in Quebec as well. So, lots of options out there.
And so what is architecture school like? We just have some slides kind of giving you more of a picture of that. So we have places throughout different schools that are really into robotic fabrication labs, or more traditional or woodworking and plastic and metal workshop labs. This one is an example of like students learning how to program these robots and use them to 3D print or build whole structures. And on the left too is more of a traditional way of working still. Like this was an example of trying to make a life-size scale model of a passive wall house. So it was kind of to help bring some of the theory of what we were learning to reality and kind of understand the metrics and how things actually go together. Because it's one thing to learn how to draw the detail and actually see how someone's going to assemble it and put it together.
Since we're here at the library, there's a very good fabrication lab at the library here. I don't know if anybody's checked it out. It's just on the second floor, I think, kind of back here. But they have all this stuff. They've got the 3D printers, they've got the CNC, there's some of the traditional woodworking tools. There's a whole fashion lab there that does different kinds of cutouts on things. And if you're interested in this stuff, the library is an awesome resource. I think it's free.
It is.
And to just get a handle on sort of like learning some of that stuff, that's a lot of what my experience at architecture school was about, fabricating things and taking things from the computer and making them physically real.
Yeah. And you just have to do their like safety training to be able to use the stuff here at the library, which is pretty quick. You do laser cutter training and you'll make a little keychain and get to test it out. So this is an example of what some schools are like. So this was my studio, one of my studios at U of C. And there's only one person here because we were here a little bit late. But like you have this whole vast space with your classmates and you have your designated desk and storage space, and you can kind of work whenever works for you within your certain deadlines and such. And you can leave all your stuff there and come back and it's still there. And so it's nice to have this type of studio space. It's more of a project-based kind of degree, which is kind of different from a lot of others where you're usually just going to lectures and going home and maybe using the library. Still have access to all those spaces, but it's nice to have a space to call your own as well. Another thing too, materials start to really add up when you're a student, but it's interesting to see what you can use out of like scrap materials and stuff. So I often would like go through and grab as many scraps and such as I could have and really start like keeping those and using them to make some like test models and such, which you'll see a little bit later. Okay, just right here. So like from my pile, you can like use things like paper or cardboard and plastic and just like test very basic ideas. So I don't find myself to be the most efficient when I sketch. I like to get my ideas out by trying to see things in like 3D. So even just using paper was one of my favorite things, or collecting cereal boxes and such. So the first one, we had the structural assignment where we were trying to build, one sense was a 1 meter tower from the ground that needed to be able to support a brick. Another time it was a 1 meter tower that needed to be cantilevered and support a brick. So trying to just like get a little idea of what forms I could find and then scale it up and then test it like that. This one right here was me trying to really focus on somebody's experience entering this one building I was designing in a studio. So I was really just focused on how I could curate this path and how it would intersect with the building on like a preliminary scale. So it's very iterative, and you kind of test ideas, do one thing, change this, and like keep going. So that's kind of fun and simple. And then another thing that's like a big component of being in the school and such is like building a lot of models. You can sketch, and it's also nice to be able to change the modality you're working with and be able to test your ideas like that. So those other ones might have seemed more abstract, but in these sense, like I was using some foam blocks to just be a placeholder for a building. And then I was trying to see, just explore this idea of how a building can kind of spread out and connect with the different spaces it was in, which is why I started using this paper stuff. I didn't show the final product, but it's more like the idea and how you don't always have to have a building design in your mind. You can kind of play around with a certain idea or aspect and kind of test that and see where the design leads you. And then this was, we went to a office and saw that this was like a more of an urban planning firm, and that you could see that they still make large scale models and try to test how their master planning and such like that works. We do a lot digitally, but it's still nice to also make a model and kind of see how the different spaces relate to each other instead of your limited
It's a great point, Joey.
view from the screen.
Not only is it helpful to make it, but you can see there's all these people standing around.
Yeah.
So there's actually like a physicality to building a real physical model. And when it's on a screen, everybody can look, you can look at it, or you're on a Zoom meeting or something, but the experience of actually standing around a table like this and looking at it brings out different ideas, and it really is helpful to the creative process.
Yeah.
And just also to add to the slide too, like in practice at a firm, it is iteration. Like all you're doing is you're iterating your client and your and as well as your colleagues, your team, because you're not going to get a building the very first shot. It's a constant development. So stuff like this, like where you're doing 70 different options, and taking one and even making a few more, that's very much relevant. That's very much analogous to how we practice this all.
So another big component of being in architecture school is this idea of crits. Not idea, but you have a lot of crits. So crits are presentations where you'll often have your project for the semester split up into a few phases. Everyone gets a spot on the wall and you start to do these pinups. Sometimes before your main presentation, there's like more informal ones, and maybe it's just you and your classmates and your professor that are kind of giving feedback and going around and kind of assessing where you're at. And then these larger ones, we often have guest crits, sometimes from the profession, from other schools, that will come and give you a critique of your project. And so it's kind of a strange concept to some, but it's really helpful to really test your ideas, be able to stand for what you did, and be able to kind of take criticism and see how the ideas you put forth, if they're really translating to how other people perceive it rather than just in your head. So it's really great practice, because we do crits in the actual profession with our clients, going back and forth. Like Olivia said, with the iterations and such, you're often getting this input and having to make a new phase or progress the model in some way. And it's nice to be able to share your ideas and to be able to see how you can make them better if your points actually stuck. So these were some examples of that, like structures project I was telling you about, trying to balance bricks and stuff. And this was a more informal crit we had where all the students kind of saw what everyone else did and could kind of work with that. So we just wanted to show an example, student project 2. So we have that school, the RAIC Center for Architecture, that offers that online undergrad. And this was one of their recent grads. She actually went on to do a master's in Germany, and she just got the RAIC Foundation College of Fellows Centennial Fund Interns Award, basically. So it's kind of cool, even if you have not the ability to maybe move out of Edmonton and go to one of these schools to do your undergrad. If you go through that option too, you can still get some of the skills you need to be able to move on further in your career. Yeah.
Exams and licensing.
Maybe in all the-
Yeah, I was gonna say, I get all the like really like the kind of more those slides. Okay,
And you say it with a smile.
they are important.
Yeah.
They are important. So I'll try not to be droll here. But you know, once you've done your master's degree, you're doing your internship. You're eligible to write the exams before you complete all your intern hours. It's usually about 80%, and there's all sorts of different sections, and they relate meaningfully to what you're going to be doing in the profession. And again, it is a licensed profession, so we have serious standards. And so it's really important that when someone is able to call themselves an architect in Canada, that you are assured that that person has gone through a fairly formal process and a rigorous examination to ensure that they know their stuff. So you're going to cover things like you know, schematic design, design development. These are just different phases, basically, in the development of a project. And then things like code research. I mentioned the building code as kind of the, if you will, the central book of architecture. And in Canada, we use the National Building Code, and every province essentially has a slightly different version of it or an interpretation of it. Once you pass your exams and completed your internship hours, in Alberta, you do a final interview. Usually that's with a senior architect. And oh, I didn't do that. I don't know why. In
Ontario, they don't, is what I hear.
Yeah,
but definitely here.
At any rate, and then you're eligible to become a licensed architect, and then they send you a little stamp, and you pay fees every year.
Usually your company pays for the fees.
Well, yeah, that's also true. Yeah, usually.
Employer usually covers.
Question. Good
I don't
question.
think so. You don't have to pass them all in one go.
Yeah.
Lots of people don't. It's sounds really intense, and it is kind of intense, to be honest. And a lot of people don't pass all 4 on the first try. It's super common to do on them. If you pass 2 of them, then you're done with those 2. The next year, you try the other 2. When you get through it. Anyone who's made it this far to get to the exams is going to get through them. Because you made it this far, like,
Yeah.
you put in the work.
The exams cover a lot of material. I remember when I was doing mine, I bought all these sort of pocket cards, and I had them in an elastic, and I just carried them in my pocket, and every day looking, building code this, you know, okay, yeah, building envelope, okay, yeah, working with engineers, yeah. So it is a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, but you're very motivated because you spent a long time studying and working toward that goal. So you won't find yourself lacking in interest usually if you get up to this point. Okay, next.
do you have a
Sorry,
question?
The rules I've seen for the e-commerce. So if you cover and you grade diploma and about the internship, should you go in Canada?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So depending on where you studied, you would apply to the local or the provincial organization. So in Alberta, it's the Alberta Association of Architects. This stamp is from Ontario, so they have it in Ontario. They will assist you in what they call validating your degree. And there's actually a third organization that does that. And they'll determine based on what school that was and what education, where you might fit in the current process. It's certainly not impossible, but there are some hoops to jump through.
Depending on where you go.
depending on where you go, where you studied. But there's definitely a path to doing so. Absolutely.
And if one's unsure before even going to said other school out of Canada, you could always reach out to them first too and kind of understand if it's going to be an extra long journey or it's exactly equivalent to what they'll let you do to just enter the internship.
When I was writing my exams, other people went in at the same time. Or, you know, when I was writing them, I was 30 or something. There were people who were in their mid-50s who were writing the exams at the same time who had come from another country and were just kind of had to do their accreditation. If you want to be licensed, there's one thing we should say is like, yes, this is a goal for some people, but it's not the only way to do the work. You can still work for an architect and not be licensed.
Yeah.
So like, for example, like I have my license, I have a stamp. There's no ink on it because I've never used it. So it's totally clean, brand new stamp, because I work for a firm that has architects and they have insurance. And so they put the stamp on it at the end of the day. So I could do that, but I don't necessarily have to.
It's a really good point. Like in an architecture office, there are lots of people. There are people who are licensed architects. There are architectural technologists. So those are people who might have done a 2-year program at a school like NAIT or at SAIT. They may do all kinds of tasks at the firm. Tasks many ways similar to a licensed architect. The licensed architect, yeah, will carry insurance, bears a personal responsibility for the work and so forth. But I would also say there's also other folks that work at architecture offices, including often interior designers, or depending on what that firm might do, people trained in urban design or in landscape, perhaps.
Graphic design.
There's people involved in marketing. So it's always helpful to have some education in architecture and working in a firm, but not necessarily. So it's a big field, and every office will have a pretty diverse crew.
Say that like the supply of the demand of architects compares to the number of architects there.
It's a good question. So like in Edmonton, we don't have a school that graduates like master's level architects. So most of the people who are working here, like ourselves, we all went elsewhere. So that means there's not a huge supply of people who are here immediately. Maybe folks like me that came home. I was in Toronto for many years, and then I came home a couple of years ago. It does vary, but in general, I would say that the business is fairly healthy. And as I look into the future, there's so much emphasis now on affordable housing. The government is getting much more involved in housing initiatives. They always talk about a real deficit in the number of units across the country. And a lot of those units are likely to be the kind of buildings that architects built, more multifamily apartments, that kind of thing. So I think it's fairly good. I mean, the architecture as a business does tend to go up and down with the strength of the economy. And I think there are folks that are in older generations who can remember times when there was rough patches. I would say it's fairly consistent though in lots of professions too. You can meet a lot of engineers who, whose careers have gone up and down too with the quality or the strength of the economy. So. Okay.
So some informal experience we're going to talk about quickly in terms of becoming an architect. It's just trying to let you know that there's ways to get involved too. So in terms of wondering if there's really supply or demand for architects too, it's nice to try and get involved with the community as well, because people will start to get to know you and remember you. And maybe that's how you can get a summer internship or start to network and meet people. I used to volunteer with the Canadian Green Building Council. And there was this time where we were going to different people's offices throughout the city. And one of them was even just like, oh, nice to meet y'all. Feel free to come back on Fridays when we have our happy hour basically. And we can get to know you more. And they were just doing that as a casual invite. There's 20 of us. But I decided you know what? I'm going to go. I'm free this one Friday. I waited a year. The guy who invited me didn't even work there anymore. And I just showed up, said I hear you have this thing happening. And in the end, I actually ended up reconnecting with that firm and getting hired for one of my first jobs early on too. So like take people's word for it when they tell you things are happening, just show up. You never know what's going to happen. So we have Edmonton Design Week, and here's some like pictures of like events that have happened recently. And there's this Eco Solar Home Tour that has a bike tour every year you can bike through or volunteer with. Were you about to say something?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, yeah, just another plug for Edmonton Design Week, you know, go to, if you're interested in this field at all, or not sure, or trying to figure it out, go to events at Design Week. There's a bunch of stuff still throughout the rest of the week, and it's a great opportunity to either volunteer or just participate and learn more.
Yeah, meet people, explore different firms too. There's some studio tours.
You might also say, like, we're talking about informal experience because it you know, the broadness of the career, or the broadness of the job, if you will, it really, it's not just about the education, it's about all the other things that you do to support the education. And, you know, I think some of the best architects are people who've had come from very different backgrounds, who have very different experiences. So the more experiences that you can gather through co-ops or other things, it's like all very valuable. And is, by the way, like when you're applying for work, or you're applying for a master's, those are things that they also look at. You know, did this person just go to school and just did this, or did the person also, you know, do some travel? Do they speak some other language? Do they understand other cultures? You know, is that going to help them relate to different clients and that kind of thing? So there's real value in diversity in the profession.
There's a couple other things on here too. Oh,
No, you can go.
There's a few on here that I think are super worthy to construction, supplying and manufacturers. Honestly, building a deck or doing projects around the house, it sounds really basic. I wish I would have done more with my dad when he asked me to do stuff around the house. I wish I would have done more of it, because even just something like building a deck and going to Home Depot, buying the supplies, seeing how it comes apart, seeing how it goes together, dealing with a permit or anything like that, that's all feeds into your sort of broad experience base. Working construction, like between my undergrad and my master's, I worked construction for 2 years in Montreal. I was done with engineering school, needed a break, moved to Montreal, worked construction, and just worked on like heritage homes and like did painting and masonry repairs and just all sorts of little tasks like that, just enough to like get some familiarity with the job site and how to wear steel toe boots and how to climb up a ladder and to do all that stuff, because I still do that. Like I go to job sites and I go into a crawl space, or I climb up scaffolding, or I still do that stuff. So that's a really good source of experience. And I know that like construction is not everybody's cup of tea, and it's not something that you have to do by any means. There's a million ways to get sort of other allied experiences. One that comes, put Adobe or Photoshop on here anywhere?
It's later.
All right, sorry.
All good, all good. But yeah, there's also like Habitat for Humanity. If you want to get your hands in construction too, you can volunteer there and work on some of their sites too and help with their housing. And this is just an example project some of y'all might have seen this summer. It's called Canopy by Jonathan Monfries. And basically it was like a design build. So he designed it. He found someone locally who had a CNC machine in their garage that fabricated this, and he assembled it and created this. But it's an example of how you can design and build something and have it be used in real time in real space for people. And also another idea of design competitions. So you can apply to things like that too and start to build up your portfolio, your resume, and things like that. So another thing that's really great is maybe going on some study abroads or some volunteering abroad and taking different summer schools. There's actually a lot of opportunity and scholarships out there. I was able to get a pretty substantial scholarship to go to Austria, and that's where this picture is from there. They have this like passive house, green building futures, something like that they offered there. And it's like a 5-week course in the summer, and 1 week is completely off and you just get to explore the city. And it was a really good opportunity to like work with other people who are from different design backgrounds, different places in their career. Some people were much deeper into their career too. The left is like a picture from LA. My school had a trip there one time, and like there's so many different study abroad options you can do. And never think like, oh, my grades aren't high enough, or I won't have the time, or I won't get accepted. Just apply. You never know if you're gonna get that grant. So just more pictures. And there's this international company called Esperanza International, and they're kind of like a Habitat for Humanity based out in Tijuana. So we were able to go as a class 2, and we helped work on somebody's house for about a week. And we also got to learn about border cities. It was like half a course, half this volunteer thing, but also when you're choosing what school you want to go, maybe you want to do something that offers you study abroad options, and maybe you want to test out working in another country. That's one way to do it. And it's really nice too, because you end up paying Canadian tuition despite being abroad. So
Habitat for Humanity is a really good one too, just to, because it plays off the work construction that I was saying, but Habitat for Humanity is great because they provide instruction and they provide safety equipment and some orientation, and it's like a really it's a really low barrier to enter. So even if you've never worked construction before, you can go to a Habitat for Humanity site and they will sort of guide you, and you can do a week, or you can do a day, or you can do a day a week, however you want to do it. But it's a really sort of easy way to just get a little bit of experience and see if it's something that you might like.
just more examples of how the world is out there. And yeah, this is like the Adobe slide. So
yeah, so this is going to hopefully answer your question here when we're getting into some of the skills that you can learn that are useful. These are, you don't have to know to do all of them, and you can probably get by without any of them, but it definitely helps. So Adobe for sure, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. I use all 3 of those almost daily. I don't use Premiere as much. It's more for video editing, but there's always an occasion when you have to figure it out. Scripting and programming are becoming way more important than they were 5 or 10 years ago. There's all sorts of digital programming languages that inform design. We've got a slide on that coming up. Photography is a useful skill. Even just any recreational basic photography skills are super good. Hand drawing, definitely. Whether you're doing it on pen and paper or with iPad, or you're drawing digitally, both are awesome.
hand drawing, and where can architecture also take you?
Yeah, so I think we talked a lot about so we've gone through sort of the formal, the informal experience of architecture, and you know, there are and there is the practice itself, but there are other avenues you can take that actually that you can do with an architecture degree, because I think when you go to school and you are an architect, you do see the world quite differently, and it's not, you really do, like, and it's an influence from your peers, it's an influence from, you know, content that they teach you at school. So there's a couple of examples here I just pulled out. So so public art, the public city architecture, this is an actual practice. They do like your building and development, but they've also done a lot of collaboration with public art initiatives and programs. And this one is a project out in Winnipeg. So, you know, this one, you know, it's about activating the space. You know, you have landscape architecture that is at a much bigger scale than architecture itself. It comes looking at things at 1 to 1,000. And then, you know, you could go down to even smaller scale, minute scale, which is about interior design, you know, making finishes, looking at detailing, how to, you know, like furniture and fixtures and lighting. So there's a lot that comprises of a building. Like, it's not one person that actually designs the building. Like, there's actually a team. So and you can take and I think all of that is relevant to your environment, to your built environment. But it depends on where you would like to take it. This is the stuff that a lot of people practices with architecture degrees and firms that call themselves an architectural practice. They've applied a lot of their skills in education this way. So and then there's ones that are a little bit more kind of even further removed, so not so much practice, but maybe film production set. Again, it's still an environment, it's still a space. I think in my first year studio, we were doing a theater set for and it was a 1-to-1 scale. So we had to design a specific area of the film set for this for another department that we're collaborating. But you know, there's stuff to said about that, right? You're still looking at your environment. You do furniture product design, which is a little bit more into like this is a AIBC table, you know, and that's looking, you know, she speaks to a lot of her form in a certain way, and she wants to translate into a smaller scale. Like, what does that look like? So there's definitely a lot of that. And then of course, going into graphic design, what we talked about, you know, Rep Pool House, I think actually has amazing, beautiful books, and they're very, very graphic oriented. They're definitely very out there. It's about ideas. Like he just wants to put his ideas about space out there, even though not all of it is built, but it's quite conceptual, but very beautifully done. And also fashion design. Virgil Abloh for the Louis Vuitton menswear was actually studied in civil engineering and architecture before he, you know, wanted to channel and do stuff in fashion. So a lot of this actually you didn't need to go through the formal training, but it's really interesting where you can take you know, an education in the study of space. So here's all list of like a whole bunch of other stuff that there are architects in there, or they have done some sort of architecture degree. Like for example, writing is very, very, there's a lot of incredible writers, and you know, and as well as video game design. Again, very spatial. And then I think a lot of architects do play a role in art, being artists themselves. You know, they would paint, but then you know they'd have their painting exhibitions, but you know they were still practicing. From 9 to 5. So there's so much land development. You know, there's a lot of architects that I know that work with developers. So it's very business. It's a very business, more business oriented, more development oriented. You know, you look at more kind of your analytics of how much money you make acquiring the land, and you know, making it profitable. So there's a whole lot of that. And at the end of the day, you're also working with a lot of disciplines. You know, maybe depending on the project, some is more focused on one component, but there's ones where you know, you're focused on another component. So yeah.
We're rapidly doing the architect thing, which is talking a lot. And I want to make sure we have some more time for questions. So maybe we can just, if we can quickly buzz through the last bit here, well, and do our best.
Contemporary issues, there's all of these. Well, European stuff. I mean, sustainability is a big one. Reconciliation, indigenous design, a big one. Carbon adaptive reuse. Next slide. AI was mentioned earlier, Midjourney. These are images that are generated from prompts. This is very new, and architects are using it to design buildings for better or worse. I guess time will tell. This is a program called Grasshopper. Here you can, I don't know if anyone's familiar with this kind of image, but you're making relationships between parameters, and you're using that to generate the form of the building or to optimize the shape of the windows. So all of the programming work is super relevant.
This is just another example of showing how one specific script focused on making one specific element, like a geometric balcony.
There's research into biomimicry, so making buildings more like living things. Materials research we touched on, lightweight construction. Yeah, whole world out there.
So we'll just go through these real quick. There's lots of wonderful buildings out there, so many different forms, so many different approaches to building, so many kinds of buildings. This is a religious building in Chile, designed. This is by Toronto. It doesn't matter. Anyway, keep going. Look at this, beautiful.
Singapore.
Yeah, a building inside a building.
And showing how you can have spaces for plants inside a building. National Museum of African American History and Culture, designed by a British Ghanaian architect, Sir David Ajayi. And it was like an example of how you can use a culturally rich form that represented some people in this culture of the exterior shape to kind of give you a design prompt or instance, and play with light and see how you can have this interconnected relationship. This is a local example of multi-generational housing in Edmonton, just on 112th and 99, by one of our most prominent Canadian architects, Cow Architects. And it's pretty solid because you wouldn't always expect a building like this is somewhere in Edmonton and people are living happily there. Why don't we build more of this? Come join us and build more of this. The Orange Hub. Some of y'all might have passed this and just been like, what is that bare orange building? But on the inside, it has a lot of light and bright yellow color. So wanted to show you some local Edmonton examples, so maybe you can go see them if you haven't already.
So why don't we end here? We've talked a lot. Are there, well, I'm sure there are some questions, so
yeah,
shoot away, or we can ask each other some questions as well. Yeah.
I'll try to be gracious as it was recommended. Maybe are there any, I don't know, companies, studios who are looking for internship students or interns? I'm a newcomer, I'm an architect, and I really want to learn about Canadian architecture. Maybe you can recommend
there's like some studio tours that are happening this week where you can actually go into some of the offices. I think there's one either happening right now or right after this at Reimagine Architects, which is nearby. HCMA is having a little thing tomorrow too. And getting involved with MAID would be really great too, because a lot of different architects around the city are part of this organization and hosting stuff throughout the year, not even just during Edmonton Design Week. Those are the top that come to mind.
Applying for jobs can be very intimidating. We've all had to do it, and it's not fun. A lot of offices aren't very big. You know, so a lot of offices have 5 people or 10 people or 20 people. And so when you apply for something, and our work is so project-based. So sometimes you can apply for something and they might say no, or that you might not hear back from them. And then 2 months later, a new project comes in, and all of a sudden they need people. So even if you don't hear back from somebody, don't give up on it. I know it can be a challenging thing to do. But yeah, just send them out, try to meet people, send them out, and if 2 months pass, 3 months pass, send them out again. And eventually something will materialize. It's so dependent on when a project comes in. All of a sudden you need a bunch of staff, and yeah,
it's not like January is when everyone's hiring. Like Steven said, projects come and projects go, budgets get cut, suddenly somebody gets funding for a project that was put on ice 2 years prior and they need people. So look on people's Instagram, on the websites, and like start to limit who you might want to work for, and then be paying attention there. Even reach out if they're not necessarily having a job ad, and like send your stuff, see if you can meet them or whatever, and start to build those relationships.
Instagram is really good.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of, you wouldn't expect
We
to find
love
a job on
Instagram.
but we post on Instagram all the time looking for people. LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
LinkedIn is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say keep talking to people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the meantime, there's a bunch of that informal experience that we talked about. That's so cool. Spending your. Question, because it's all control, but I think, and what the practice is, but I think a lot of the time it is an office job. It is, there are, you're designing, you're iterating, when you get to, I think let's say when you start off, it is a lot about what you usually under a senior architect, and, you're doing a lot of digital visuals and problem solving for and helping them do some problem solving, or they have tasks that they LBTU that you help them with. And then there's some where, you know, once you get to a senior architect, you know, you actually start going to client meetings, you're presenting work, or pitching an idea. Yeah, it kind of changes, and I think also you're even going on site. There are some days that you have to. That's been drawn up. So it's mainly office, but I'd say that there, you know, it's still, there's quite a variety, and it's, you know, and it's always, you're kind of taking on more the like project. Yeah.
And the studio culture that we saw at school.
Yeah.
Does kind of translate over into the
Yeah,
office
that's good.
environment. So
Yeah.
I haven't seen too many offices that are full of cubicles. They tend to be open office places. We have a whole wall in our office that's covered in whiteboard paint. People are always drawing things on there. We sometimes will just pin stuff up on the wall, just like in the crit that Joy presented. Like those are things we still do. So it's pretty fun
Yeah.
place to work. Like
Yeah.
lately I've been traveling more, so sometimes that means it's like on the plane, on my iPad, drawing things or reviewing something. So it's starting to change a little bit for me because I'm traveling a little bit more.
Yeah. Kind of changes with your career. But yeah, and there's a lot of areas where there's a collab space. So you kind of almost sit together on a table and just discuss. Discuss the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in terms of like getting into the industry and working, is it a portfolio process? Like, are you, when you're applying for jobs, bringing in a set of portfolio, or do you have like a website that's showcasing your from school or otherwise, or is it more based on like the degrees you have?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised we missed that.
I thought about that too, that we didn't have a portfolio component, but yeah, like a big part of, for example, getting into the bachelor's or the master's is a portfolio. When you're applying for jobs, they're often looking for a portfolio. It's often easy to put together a portfolio if you had some type of design undergrad or background, or you're a fine artist or something in your spare time, but sometimes you aren't. So it's like a good opportunity to maybe look for some competitions, test yourself out, maybe take a art class or something. There's also, in the States, they have a lot of these bridge programs, because they have a lot of programs where a lot of just the master's offering and people who don't have portfolio stuff. In Ottawa, they just started this like program called Studio First back in 2016, which is like a 5-week course in like June, let's say June or July. And it's meant to give you a taste of what it would be like to be at the Carleton Israeli School of Architecture and Urbanism, but also an opportunity to generate portfolio material. That's on the other side of the country and a bit far for some, or even an expense, but there are ways to start to build up your portfolio and such. And some schools are looking at a balance of your portfolio and your grades or what you studied prior, and also your letter of interest, your recommendations. So they will also weigh that too. If you don't have a strong portfolio, but you have a stronger everything else, and depending on the school, they'll accept you too. So it's worth to really like look at the schools you want, apply and see if you get in. You can also reach out and be like, what could I do better to get in next time? With firms too, try to put together a portfolio and maybe like even get to know people that can maybe critique your portfolio or give you advice on how to tighten it up and make it stronger. Go on that issue website and look at example portfolios too.
Yeah, there's lots of good stuff out there. It is really portfolio based.
Yeah.
Getting into school and then getting a job they're both going to be portfolio based. So you'll usually submit a CV or a resume. It could be a 1-page, maximum 2 pages kind of resume, and then a portfolio. I don't know if I would make websites. I did at one point in my life, and I put a lot of work into figuring out how to do it, and it served me no value. So I would just, a good PDF set that you could email somebody, and they can flip through it and just see the breadth of your experience. The portfolio aspect can definitely be intimidating. I found it very intimidating. Coming from engineering school, I just didn't have nice drawings or cool things. So I tried to be creative with it, and I put in some really technical stuff that I did, because we showed a lot of graphics and stuff, but the job is quite technical. Or parts of the job are very technical. So I think that actually worked to my advantage in that case, showing the sort of technical abilities. So it's just, it's intimidating and it's hard, but yeah, I think that advice on getting someone else to look at it, even if it's your parents or your friend, a lot of it is visual communication. So anything that you can improve, yeah.
And there's some programs that are more lenient with the portfolio too. If you end up doing an undergrad in Calgary, even though they don't have an architecture degree, for the bachelor's, they have something called a minor in architecture, and it's a very minor portfolio that one has to do. And you end up taking the first year of the master's throughout that minor while you're doing your like 4-year bachelor's in history or engineering or whatever it is, and suddenly you have portfolio material. And some of my classmates went to schools in the States or other parts of the country. So if you're at that part where you're trying to get into school still, that's another degree or another route you can go as well. But yeah, everything can be learned.
How did you fund your master's and student work during full-time or part-time?
Yeah, I did. And I also had, well, during my undergrad, well, like in the summer, sorry, during the summer, I came back. And I also, they actually have, for them, I know has a lot of scholarships and ministries that I also. And I also student loans too. Yeah, so it was a little bit of everything for me.
I worked as a TA, like a teaching assistant in the architecture program. So when I was in my first or second year master's, I was helping out with the undergrad course. So like grading papers and just having open office hours and ask questions. That was a good one because I was already at school. I also worked as a research assistant for a professor at the school. Often the instructors have some funding to do their research. So they're often looking for students to help them with it. It's pretty challenging to work a part-time job during the master's program, like in school, because it can be done. I know people. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried.
But you could also find work too, like there are firms here that do look for like students, level. You know, you're still in school, you know, but you're just looking to get some experience, get paid, and also get paid. There are firms that have done.
Especially because you have like that 4-month window and such. Yeah, I did mostly student loans. I tried 1 semester of my master's working, and it was very hard to get any sleep at all. So it's nice to try and work during those summers. And even like there's something called the Edmonton Community Foundation. There's a Calgary Community Foundation, and these places also have some funding that they give out to students too, depending on like yeah, they have like bursaries and scholarships as well, which are pretty helpful, and they're trying to reward people for still trying to find a balance to volunteer and like do things in the community. Some of these student loans have grant components as well, but yeah.
Whichever school that you pick, definitely look at the.
Yeah. Or do TA-ship, like you said, or even their fabrication labs too. You can end up working in some of those as well and working part-time, and they're really flexible because they know you're in these programs too, so.
Yes, I have a question. So within Canada, there's obviously so many different schools that you can apply. And each school's program style, a generalized master of architecture. So what I'm trying to wonder is like, how do you know what program do like what you might enjoy but not actually?
It's a great question. They all have sort of different pedagogies or different outlooks on it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors that weigh into it, and they change over time. So
Yeah.
Olivia and I were both at University of Manitoba at the same time, where there were a certain set of professors who had a certain sort of methodology, and I think they're mostly gone now.
Yeah, are they? Yeah.
They're mostly gone now, so it might not be the same now
Yeah.
as it was 10 years ago when we were there.
Something we-
Yeah, there might be a few holdouts. I went where I got in, plain and simple. Like, I didn't have many options at that point.
You can look at, like, Stephen was saying, Instagram for people's firms. You can look at the Instagrams for these different schools. They usually have like a student group too. You can reach out to them. They're usually pretty responsive and kind of get it from the student firsthand, because it changes pretty fast. Even though you're just mentioning like a 10-year span, even between me entering U of C in 2017 to leaving in 2021, it's like hardcore, a huge staff now that's really into computational design and like robotics. Whereas when I first got there, it was kind of not as big as it is now, but there's still profs there, even with these certain methodologies that we sometimes affiliate it with this school versus that. There are still other professors who have other ideas too. So you can also kind of get more insight by reaching out to the students or the profs directly too.
There's a lot
Open
of, there's a
house.
lot of Reddits too, and like message boards where people are talking about their recent experience. It's a good way to do it. I will say one thing though, in Canada, because master's programs are very highly regulated by the Canadian Accreditation Board or whatever it's called. I would say a bit of a critique is actually the schools in Canada are actually probably more the same than they are different. I'd say there's actually more diversity in programs in places like the United States, where there are some programs that are like SciArc, which is the University Southern California Institute of Architecture in Los Angeles. It's known as a really far out school. It's very theoretical. It's very computational. You go to that school, you probably don't really build buildings. You're building
Buildings with fur on them.
Yeah, buildings with fur on them. Yeah, exactly. And then there's some firm or some programs in the United States that really focus on actual like physical work, like actually learning building. And that would be like a rural studio at the University or Auburn University, Alabama, University of Alabama. Yeah. At any rate,
Or research like at MIT
yeah.
and such.
So there is differences, but I would say in Canada, in some ways, they're a bit more subtle because of how we're regulated. But I would say that we're probably not even we're definitely not the best people to ask it. Like online, there's people who've just finished and they're always talking about their experience. And
It also be helpful to look at if you're looking at University of Calgary, for example, looking at who the staff are and what they do, because they're pretty small programs. And for the most part, I mean, if you're there, I was there for 4 years total. The studio part of it it's like 60% of your course. That's with one instructor. So over 4 years, I worked with 4 instructors. Then there were some other ones who I would do like a history course with, or a theory course, or a technical course. They're kind of small, but really in 4 years, I worked with 4 instructors. So if you see somebody that resonates with you, or that really seems like, hey, this person's work seems really interesting, I want to work with them, that's a good indication that you're pointed in the right direction.
Were your studios 1 year long, or
They were
you
full
had?
year, yeah.
Oh, so that's something too, because like at U of C, they're a semester long. So then I had 8 main studio profs, for example. And sometimes different schools bring in sessional instructors. At U of C, they often like would bring in somebody who's actually working in a firm to lead a studio, and that sessional is not always the same. Some come on a more regular basis, some are not. And even like one of my classmates who graduated the same year, she's even leading a studio right now, which is pretty solid. So yeah, but then sometimes it's random how you get allocated too, because there's one person I know who wanted to study with a specific studio prof and he never did his entire 2 years there for the master's. So it's worth looking at that list of faculty and maybe seeing what they do and then reaching out to the students there too.
Mine is more about like on liability that often architects carry a lot of liability and sometimes very long term. The question is about how what's the understanding of the clients and what for design for what they understand, how much knowledge they have, how much sort of liabilities architects carry, and do you all find yourself working within their timelines, their deadlines, where due diligence almost comes in conflict with what you really want to
Definitely.
do? So is it
It's definitely a challenge. One thing with liability that, when I started out, liability was really scary. And it's a little bit less scary now because for everything that you're liable for, you also have insurance. So there is always there's a backstop there. You want to avoid needing insurance, just like all insurance, you'd rather not use it if you don't have to, but it's there, and there's a lot of effort put into the contracts and the language of the contracts. Something that I'm not very good at, but you are.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Like, no, you said it right, that there is language in the contract that protects, you know, like in every building, you get essentially you have a consultant, you have an owner, and you have a contract, and that's what the entire construction contract is built off of. And then, you know, you also have a separate contract that you have that's going to clients, and that also has a bunch of really, really lawyer language that I can't explain, but they're all built into the contract as well. So I think liability, like, unless you're trying to build a building out of fur, like, I totally think, you know, you're quite, like, the contract does protect you. But that negotiation of, you know, what you have with the clients and with the builders every single day is something an architect does. It's something that, you know, your client's gonna ask you something, and it's gonna be like, that's so not code, you know, as professional, bring it forward. So it's a lot of, it's something that's an everyday that you do battle with, and it's very much part of the job.
Is it like more so more projects out of your mentality that can't speak it at a level, maybe or is it more like more projects out of your mentality, or is it more due diligence of each project, what it takes to do? Because usually there's a
More
practice.
due diligence,
Yeah.
for sure, because at the end of the
You're not
day,
trying to get sued.
somebody's putting the stamp on it, so they're taking professional liability and personal liability for the product that's going out. So because you have the stamp, because it's a registered profession, in a way you get the final say. So the client may try to push you in one direction, but you don't have to go along with that if you don't.
So it's not really a second seat kind of position.
You can always argue, or you can walk away, or
Yeah.
there's lots of ways to sort of deal with that. That has never happened. Like
Yeah.
It's a conversation,
I've experienced
basically.
with that stuff because it doesn't happen a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
A couple more, you had one, so maybe.
You can study anywhere, but then you write this national exam,
Mhm.
right? And it's consistent, and then you do get licensed in a province, but you, like I said, you can get multiple licenses too. So,
Oh, just one exam.
but just one exam, yeah. So it doesn't matter where you study, it gives you opportunity to, and there are now reciprocity agreements too with the United States as well. So, you know, if you're licensed, for example, well, let's start with Canada. Like I was licensed in Ontario and I moved back here. I wanted to get licensed, so they just basically transferred the license. I just had to pay some money. But there are also agreements internationally too, where architects in Canada can practice in the United States and vice versa.
There's some local, you know, I think if you move to Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba, you have to work here for 6 months or something, just to understand the climate conditions. And British Columbia has a little bit more seismic considerations, so they've got a little extra thing you kind of have to do there. They also have a little more focus on Indigenous engagement. So there's some other sort of hours you have to do there, but so there's some subtleties with it. But once you get through the door, it gets a lot easier to move around.
Every firm is different. I'll start with that. And you looked like you were about to say something.
Yeah, it's true, every firm's different,
Mhm.
like, I guess it's not, I would say it's not as intense as studio. Cause it's your project probably, like,
Yeah.
with my project, you know, I need to go more, and I had, like, it was really personal, I invented the client, I invented the site, stuff like that. But I think I think that, there are moments in the project where, yeah, I was working, but it's never like all anymore. least for me, and, like, get, you pretty much still get that 9 to 5, like, you do finish at 5. But yeah, depends on depends on the project. There's certain milestones and deadlines here that does get intense, so yeah, and working till 7.
I've mostly worked 9 to 5 for almost always 40 hours a week. Sometimes, like on that theater project I presented, that's working with an arts organization. It was a passion project that I got really excited about. I probably put in more time than 40 hours a week at certain points in the project because I'm passionate about it, but really enjoying it. I knew it was important to them and it was important to me, so I could put a little bit more of myself into it. But I was never doing 60 hours a week or anything crazy.
So we're at 5 to 6, which is great because it means there's people are interested in stuff. So can we do a couple more questions?
Sure.
And we're also here, so like, I just wanted
Yeah.
3 people to go and.
This gentleman, and then we'll do her over there. What was yours?
Would you say that architects mostly are doing projects they want to do, they enjoy doing? Or do you find that the market and supply and demand as you're doing, or many architects doing projects that they don't really want to do, but want to do something?
Yeah.
Can't all be building.
Yeah. Stars, architect stuff.
Yeah,
I think it also depends on the firm too, because there's some firms that have their like
the general.
bread and butter, like certain bigger firms have their like bread and butter projects where they're just trying to get income into the firm basically and doing like basic stuff. But that helps fund some of their more elaborate designs to a certain capacity. But like one is never tied to wherever they work too. So if you find yourself working on stuff that does not bring you any joy at all and is draining you, look for somewhere that sparks some interest kind of thing. Like you do get that kind of say. You don't have to stay somewhere that's miserable basically. And there are some very exciting things happening with firms here as well as outside of the city, outside of the province, throughout the country. So there's a mix there. There's some people who do want to just put their head down, get their hours by any means possible, and they'll end up working on that more. They don't really care about the work being jazzy, or they want just this title, I guess. It really, everybody's interest is kind of different, but if you want something that's more exciting, you can definitely find that.
A lot of it comes from inside.
Yeah.
If you want the project to be good, then you can make it good. If you don't have the energy or the time or the capacity or are interested in putting in that effort, then you can try to do it quicker. But at the end of the day, it sort of comes back to the first, you kind of make it what you want it to be. And then the other half of that is, I don't think I could take on the most challenging, amazing projects back to back to back on top of each other. You're often not working on one at a time, you're working on 4 or 5 or 6 different things that are in different phases. So sometimes you need a little bit of a cooling down period before really ramping up and getting excited about the next one. So yeah, I don't know if that answers.
Sounds like it's functional.
Yeah, it's totally functional. You know, you put in the energy when you have it and you want to, and it means something to you. And sometimes it's just about getting it.
Like there are firms that just, I think, work for sort of low quality builders, and they just pound out the work. And there are firms that just do that. And some people are perfectly fine with that. And that's the workaday architecture, checking the boxes for building code and that kind of thing. Most firms are a bit of a mix. And there's always going to be jobs, just like I think in any profession, you know, not every doctor is going to love every day doing this or that, or every lawyer or whatever. So it's kind of a mix. And just like, I think all things, you try to find joy where you can, you know, knowing that, yeah, to your point, like you are paying the bills by simply working, billing hours. And, but you know, if you're good, you get more choices. I think that's probably true in most professions.
And you can turn stuff down too, as opposed to needing to take everything that comes through the door. But you can also do that if you aren't, I don't know, if you're not happy, you're not going to do good work and you might not finish the project. So don't accept things you don't want to work on, in my opinion.
Okay.
Sorry, just one more to add. I also think it's important to work with, like, it's a really great client. Sometimes the project itself is maybe not that exciting, but there's vision behind the client and there's a relationship you want to build with the client. So I have definitely one. It's always starting on this small projects. test product, and then you build and eventually.
It's a great point. Sometimes it's not about this exciting looking thing. It's about providing housing for people to need. So there are ways that you can find passion in projects, even when it may not be this like
Flashy thing.
flashy project. So there's lots of ways to find it.
And small wins. Anyway,
Yeah.
we should keep going. One more question.
When I researched about over 10 years ago, there's like thesis-based master degree and project-based. I'm wondering if that's still the same case today, and is that something you guys considered when you guys went into
Well, I did a thesis, and I also went to the school that I got into. It wasn't really in the metric for me, but I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't do a thesis, so I applied to Carleton and U of C alone. Because I felt that I had a good chance of getting into both schools. I had gone to like an open house at U of C. They actually offered this like portfolio review week. And the person who I met gave me such confidence of how I could like finish my portfolio and stuff. And I felt like, you know what, I actually have some material here. I could probably apply there. I applied at Carleton because I did their like bridge program that one summer, got a familiarity with their studio and some of the profs there as well. Carleton had a thesis, Calgary did not. And I'm not sure if everyone finishes their thesis, if any of you finished your thesis in the regular time that you wanted to finish your thesis. But knowing some people who took a lot longer than they wanted to, or like had these roundabout routes, I wasn't personally interested in doing a thesis. And I was really interested in Calgary at the time because they were starting to do more projects with the community or bring in some of these sessional ideas and kind of almost revolutionize how they were trying to deliver the architecture and education. And that was appealing to me. And also I like the idea of learning from different perspectives in different schools. So there are a lot of people who do these thesis programs, which I'm pretty sure everyone except for Calgary, I could be wrong. And they have this strong piece that they're able to put in their portfolio when they're applying for jobs afterwards. So it is this nice opportunity to do like an independent project and such. And at Calgary, even though we didn't have the thesis, we still had a very intense final year and we're able to put together a pretty substantial project, but it was over the course of one semester versus a whole year, or if somebody took like a year or two to do that thesis. So those are things you can kind of consider as well, and maybe look and see if you can see example thesis projects or example final projects from those graduating years too, to help in your decision.
We get too caught up in it either way because
Yeah.
I don't think my thesis helped me get a job.
I don't find either.
It was very theoretical. And you just, sort of, once you get out of school, you start working somewhere and you learn a bunch from that person, and then to the next job and you learn a bunch from them, and then you just kind of move through it. So
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, one more question.
So I'm doing like architecture, technology, and Nate, as you guys were saying that they're like not come to like an undergrad.
Sure.
So do I have to do like another undergrad? I have to do like couple of courses to bridge the gap and then start my master's.
Well, I think it depends if some of the courses that you're taking at NATE will be eligible for undergraduate credit. I can't speak to that.
Yeah.
It's possible that there are transfers, credits that do transfer. You have to, you definitely have to do some more education. So I think the best one would be to talk to, you know, a university like U of A and say, well, which of these credits might actually transfer into a different degree. Yeah.
Or even the master's schools you might want to go to, you could reach out to them too and see what they'd advise.
yeah. And if you can finish at NATE and work for a year or two and see if you like it.
Yeah.
And you might like it enough that you're like, well, I don't need any more education. I'm making money and I'm enjoying the work.
Yeah.
And I'm doing the stuff. Or maybe you're like, you know what, I actually would like to do a little bit more of the theoretical backstory, and I want to get my license. I want to get there. And okay, maybe now we'll go.
And that's a great background. Like I know a few people who did a tech degree worked for a bit, and then went and did their master's, and wow, they could do a lot of things that,
Yeah.
that I couldn't do and others couldn't do because they had that technical background. They
Mhm.
really understood the software, they understood the drawing conventions, they knew a lot about code,
Yeah.
you know, and then especially if they had worked a bit too, they were like really far ahead. So it's all valuable, I
Yeah.
guess is the point. It's all valuable experience. I'm gonna say thank you. Thank you so much for coming.